I'm Lou and this is Lily Rowe. In today's video, we're going to have a little think a bit more about how to facilitate learner-led forest school sessions. And this has come from a question that was posted by Kikiva83, who says that she's been thinking about how do you facilitate sessions to cater for everybody's individualised needs and interests all in one session. So a big thank you, Kikiva83, because this is a great question. And I think it's quite a common question or thought process that people starting out in their forest school journey go through. I know I certainly did at the beginning, because you've got all these learners and it's a bit like spinning plates, because you have been observing that learner and you know they like that and that learner likes that, and you're thinking, oh goodness, how am I going to manage all of that all at the same time in each session? So I thought I could offer some thoughts and share my experiences around this kind of thing, and hopefully it might be useful to you. So firstly is think about your group size. Forest school works most effectively when you've got smaller than average class sizes and with a higher adult to child ratio. So from my experience, you're looking at probably up to 12, maybe up to 16 mainstream learners. So that is half a normal kind of class size of 30. You know, if you've got 16, that's quite hard work in terms of keeping track of everybody. I know sometimes in schools, for whatever reason, certain limitations, you have to take out a whole class, 30 kids. And I have done that myself in the past because that was the only way I could get them out. And I've observed that, you know, the quality of the session in terms of its learner-ledness does decline with a bigger group, just because, you know, 30 kids, you're kind of just crowd management rather than getting to know individuals in more depth and being able to plan for those individuals. So do look at the group size that you're taking out, as well as, oh, there's a little shelter here. Yeah, should we check this out? Yeah, we check it out. So, what were we saying, Bubs? We were saying, yes, be aware of your group size. And also think about your ratios of adult supervision as well, and make sure that you've got high enough supervision of the right sort of adults, if that makes sense. Sometimes adult helpers can be a bit of a hindrance more than a help. You know, they mean well, but just if they don't understand the ethos of forest school, or haven't got levels of competencies in some of the skills that we're trying to facilitate, then they're not always as helpful as they could be. So it is well worth kind of having some sort of training sessions with your helpers, and you could train them to help you gather observations and you know, plan for learners' next steps, you know, build that relationship of trust. And again, particularly if you have got a larger group, then, you know, relying on helpers is essential, because it's just impossible for you as a forest school leader to be everywhere all of the time. So, yeah, really rely on your helpers. Sorry, Bubba is just sliding down the hill underneath the camera. Yeah. Something else I've noticed, particularly at the beginning of a forest school programme, is there seems to often be a period of what I call wildness, where, I hope that was a dog talking about wildness, where I've put this down to it being a new thing to learners. You know, it might be a new site, new activities, new things to explore, new ways of working. And yeah, the first few sessions can be quite lively, and you know, you will often have learners that, you know, they want to do this and then they want to do that, and they're all into this and they're into that, and they want to try to do everything all at once in one session. But what I've noticed is that does settle down. So often that might be the first half a term, 6, 8, 10 weeks of a programme. But because Forest School is a long-term process, we've got kind of the luxury, I suppose, of working through that wildness, and learners will then settle down and engage in their own projects. This is where, I guess, if you're doing your introductory programme to Forest School as part of your Forest School training, so the minimum for that is 6 weeks. Of course, some people choose to do longer. At 6 weeks, you're really probably only just maybe coming out of the wildness, or you might still be in the wildness in session 6. The reason 6 weeks is the minimum length of session for your training is because they reckon that 6 weeks is the minimum length of time before you see any effect on the learners in terms of engaging with the Forest School programme. But really, a Forest School programme should be continuing on, ideally a full year, so that you have got that long-term process. So leading on from this, it sounds like you are facilitating lots of choice at your Forest School. You kind of explained in your message about all the different opportunities and resources and things that you have been putting out based on the children's interests. Which of course is part of Forest School, and definitely at the beginning of a Forest School programme, offering choice to learners is really important, because they might not yet know how to play out in Forest School. They might not have been to a woods before, they might not know what you can do. So offering choices is definitely a big part at the beginning of a programme. But again, with time, what I've noticed is that changes, because once the children get going with their own play ideas, are you trying to get through? Are you trying to get through? There's a stick in the way. Once they get going with their own ideas and projects and play things, we just have to kind of roll with it, and we might have some ideas and sort of thoughts about how to help them and support them, but ultimately the ideas come from the children themselves in their own play. So then planning becomes much easier because it's coming from them. They've got the power to do things, and we just have to sort of help them. One final thought about this I think is worth exploring is that often as Forest School leaders, we don't have the optimum resources that we might wish for. So for example, we might not have enough staff that we would ideally want. We might not have enough time, we might not have enough money to buy the resources we need. So we're often operating with limitations, and because of those limitations, there might need to be compromise within our Forest School sessions. So I've been in this situation where we haven't had enough staff to cover the activities, the experiences that the children wanted to engage in, because certain activities needed adult supervision, such as cooking on the fire or using tools or working at height. And so, yeah. And so rather, I'm afraid I've lost my thread completely. We've had dog walkers, aeroplanes, Bubba wanting milk, all sorts happening. See? I think we were talking about, what were we talking about? We're talking about when we didn't have enough resources. And yeah, it is something to cry about, Bubs, isn't it, when we don't have enough resources. So I was in a situation, we didn't have enough staff ratios to do all of the activities all at the same time. So we decided to share that with the learners. We kind of told them how it was, and got them involved with the problem solving rather than it just being an issue for me as the forest school leader. Here comes the aeroplane. And so through having a facilitated discussion, this becomes an opportunity for learning and growth. So I would share the problem that we had, not enough staff, lots of activities, and the group themselves would think of the solution. So it's an opportunity for social and emotional development and skills like negotiation and discussion. And so through offering it to the group, they would come up with their own solutions, such as, this week we'll have the fire happening and cooking, but, next week maybe we'll be able to carry on with our treehouse construction. And the children would talk to each other and work that out for themselves. So what on one hand was perceived as a big problem, an issue, on the other hand became an interesting area for the children to develop and grow in those interpersonal skills. So that's what I've done in the past. And I guess ultimately, because we often are working with limitations, sometimes it isn't possible to meet the needs and interests of every individual in the group in that particular session. But again, that's what's so great about Forest School. It is a long-term process. So if there are learners that perhaps are a bit missed or looked over. Oh, Bubs, are you falling off the log? Bub is falling off the log. So yeah, if individuals are missed one week, then there's opportunities in future weeks to put more focus onto them. Another part of the question from Kikiva was about how to put reasonable timeframes on ourselves to allow ourselves to effectively plan and observe and evaluate and to resource our sessions. Another brilliant question. Because again, I think it's very natural at the beginning of your forest school journey to want to do the best job that you can, and perhaps that looks like lots of planning for every eventuality. I know myself, when I first did my first programme, I planned about enough to probably last a full year, and it was only a 7-week pilot programme. So I recognise that desire to over plan, and you've got ideas and resources and things coming out of your ears, and most of the stuff doesn't actually get used for that programme. So that's completely natural. I was very fortunate when I did my first programme to have another couple of practitioners who were also doing the level 3 training, and so we worked together when we were running our pilot programme, which was absolutely invaluable to have other people on the same wavelength to talk through observations and evaluating the session. So I found that really, really useful. So if you're first starting out, maybe if you're not working with another level 3 practitioner, maybe even one of your helpers, maybe you could, if they're up for talking about the observations, what they've seen the learners do in that particular session. Even if it's just 10-15 minutes at the end of the session, or when you're packing away the kit or something like that, find somebody to talk stuff through with. Can be really, really handy in terms of consolidating your thoughts about the session and how to move on in the next session. Something else I would say about planning is, even if you do over plan like I did at the beginning, that's not wasted. So even though it might seem like a lot of energy and time at the beginning, that might prove useful and save you time in the future. So I have done a video about how I plan both the long-term planning and short-term planning. In the long-term planning video, I share a tool with you which I call the planning trees, and these are, I guess, topic plans in a kind of way, where I explore a topic that I see a learner particularly interested in, and then grow that, and think of lots of different possible pathways that the learners might go down, and I use that as a way to kind of keep a few steps ahead of the learners whilst they're exploring. So that often does take a lot of time at the beginning of a program, but once you've got them, you keep them. I mean, I've kept some that I've had from 15 years ago, and I've still got them in a folder, and they still can be useful in different programs. So although it might seem like a lot of work, it might prove useful in future, in that particular program, or in future programs. So nothing's wasted. I think it is also worth being aware that as you gain more experience as a forest school leader, as you run more programs with different groups of learners, you will find your way with things. So it's important to find out what works for you in terms of logistics of gathering observations, evaluations and planning. So maybe when you're first starting out, try a few different methods of recording things. I personally have a terrible memory, so I usually keep a little notebook in my pocket and jot down a few thoughts, a few notes, a few observations in the moment when I can, or as soon as I'm able to, because otherwise I'll forget them. And I used to give my helpers their own little notebooks too, so I could kind of collect in all the notebooks after each session and kind of consolidate, bring all that information together. I know other people might use post-it notes or stickers, or they might voice record things, they might take video clips, lots of different ways of actually gathering that information and processing it. Of course, nowadays as well, if you work in early years, a lot of observations might get used for learners' profiles, foundation stage profiles. So there might be software like Tapestry and things that people use, and they kind of would upload observations straight onto that as well. So there are lots of different methods. In terms of like evaluating, sometimes, particularly if a forest school program has been asked for a particular purpose, then I might use numerical scales to evaluate certain progress in individuals. So for example, there's the Leuven scales of well-being and involvement that are like a 5-point scale that at the end of each session, maybe I've got a list of learners and I kind of jot that number down. I've also kind of invented my own scales to record progress in, I'm thinking particularly like social emotional development and those sorts of things. Usually because maybe it's a pilot program and we need a way of demonstrating, a way of demonstrating the effects that forest school's having on people. So you could explore ways of streamlining your evaluations and observations through that sort of system. I also sometimes with learners with particular practical skills like tool use, I also kind of have a tracking mechanism where it's kind of like a tick sheet, and it explains where a learner's at with that particular skill based on what I've seen. Again, because I've got a terrible memory, otherwise I forget. So for example, if it's soaring, can that learner, well, there's usually have a go and then competent in each column. So has that child had a go at soaring two-person with an adult. Are they competent at doing that? Have they had a go using a hacksaw on their own? Or are they competent at that? And so it's kind of like a tick box with all the tools, and those columns have had a go, competent, in a certain sort of order of progression, and then I kind of use that and keep track of who's done what in terms of tool use at Forest School. So there are other systems like that that could be used, but again, it's find what works for you, and what is most effective for your circumstance as well, because sometimes this information needs to be shared with other people as well, so you might need to think about that too. Over time, often we'll become naturally more effective and quicker at what we do once we've found stuff that works. And so, you know, I found like now it only takes me a fraction of a time to evaluate and plan for the next session compared to when I first was starting out. So be assured that, you know, just naturally through the course of time and experience, these sorts of things will become more streamlined. If you are just starting out and you want some reflective questions that might help you focus your evaluations at the end of each session, here are some things that I tend to do that has helped me in the past. First is to reflect on what worked well that session, what worked well. So maybe we tried a new song or something. Then ask yourself, why did that work well? Can you work out why it worked well? So maybe that song had some actions and that seemed to really engage the learners and bring them together. So what worked well, why, and then how can we do more of that in the future? So if I think it's the action stuff that the learners liked, then maybe I can make sure that we bring in some more physical games or activities during our together time or towards our circle time, or offer that as a choice. I also reflect on whether I've seen any play starting to emerge. So play, remember, we're talking about things that are freely chosen, personally directed and intrinsically motivated by the individual learners, rather than it necessarily being an adult offered choice. So if you start to see that, it's worth jotting that down, and then also asking yourself, is there any logistics or resources or even possible skill seeding that you could do in future sessions that would really support that play? So that's something I would tend to record. And then finally, it's also worth asking yourself, is there anything that could be improved or anything that didn't quite work as well as you hoped? And reflecting on that, as well as any sort of health and safety concerns or anything like a near miss or anything like that would need to be reflected on as well. So I found those kind of categories of reflective questions quite useful when I was first starting out, to know where to focus my attention. As with everything, awareness is the first step. So if you are asking yourselves reflective questions, if you are evaluating your sessions, if you are noticing and observing your learners, then that's going to set you on the right path for being able to plan effective learner-led sessions in the future, and have a great program. Do you have some other tips on how to facilitate learner-led sessions? Do let us know in the comment section below. If you've enjoyed this video, do give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing to our channel so you can join us again in the woods next time. And thanks for watching. Learner-led sessions can be full-on, observing and planning the next steps to build upon. Gaining supportive helpers can set you free to share the paperwork the next time you head to the trees. Bye!